Hello, class. So here we are in week 5, and yet again another glorious Scott video. Uh, this week's reading was very interesting. There were two pieces that I really clung to. One of them I'm gonna have to stretch to kind of get a Western theme out of it, but I liked it so much that I had to find a way to incorporate it into this week's discussion. So a quick overview: the two pieces of work that I'll be reviewing to make this post is The Outcast of Poker Flat by Bret Hart. You know, he's the guy that's the best there ever was, the best there is, and the best there ever will be. Wait, no, that's the wrong guy. And then, if you're not a wrestling fan, you didn't get that, so never mind. And then Zane Grey's, we got that website and all of the different Zane Grey stories. And the one I picked was The Day of the Beast, simply off of the title because it looked cool. And then lo and behold, it was something that really captured my attention. So those will be the two pieces that I will incorporate into this post. So, starting out, we're going to talk about the good old West as portrayed in The Outcast of Poker Flat, which really kind of ties into my mentality of the West. I've been exposed to it ever since I was a kid. My grandfather retired from the Army, I think in like the late 70s, something like that. And then he started his new career as a jockey because he was 5 foot, half inch, and he had little man syndrome. So he was a jockey for, I think, 10 years before they moved to Maricopa County, or Maricopa, the city in Arizona. And he and my grandmother started a ranch with horses and everything. But my grandma and my grandfather were, straight up Western people. Cowboy boots. I learned how to skin snakes. I had cowboy boots, the whole nine. When I went there for summers, it was waking up at the crack of dawn to feed the horses and learning to ride and everything like that. Down to even the only thing that ever was on TV at their house were old school Westerns. At the time, I hated it. Now, every now and again, it's kind of nostalgic. But that's the feel I got from The Outcast of Poker Flats. So the first thing I want to point out is in all instances of the West is always like its own entity. Like, doesn't really matter what city, like in this case, it's Poker Flat. The West is its own entity. And the only thing I could think of to really relate that to today would be like Las Vegas. Like, when you speak of Las Vegas, people speak about it like it's its own thing. Like, oh man, Las Vegas got that person. Or Bangkok from Hangover. Those cities that people just talk about them like they're alive. And that's pretty much how the entire West was in the representations that I've been given. So in this story, near the beginning, it's and to quote it, in point of fact, Poker Flat was after somebody. It had lately suffered a loss of several $1,000, 2 valuable horses, and a prominent citizen. It was experiencing a spasm of virtuous reaction, quite as lawless and ungovernable as any of the acts that had provoked it. And then this is a part of your Western justice. A secret committee had determined to rid the town of all improper persons. This was done permanently in regard to 2 men who were then hanging from the boughs of a sycamore in the gulch, and temporarily in the banishment of certain other objectionable characters. And then this next line kind of takes us to gender roles. I regret to say that some of these were even ladies. Now, obviously, I don't think that, women should be, excommunicated, banished, or killed either, but it's like, why was there emphasis on I regret to say? It's like, how about you just regret to say that people in general had been killed or banished? So that kind of shows, there were those lines where, oh, the women are weak. We have to feel bad when a woman is hurt more than a man because a woman can't protect themselves, and that is not how I like to think our current society is. Women are just as strong as men and can hold their own. It is, but due to the sex, however, to state that their improperty was professional, and it was only in such easily established standards of an evil that Poker Flat ventured to sit in judgment. So we've kind of laid the groundwork that Poker Flats is an entity, kind of like the West, and that, it was... They felt that it had been wronged, and therefore a secret committee, not the government or anything like that, a secret committee was out there giving out vigilante or Western justice. Now, the main character, Mr. Oakhurst, he kind of shows a proper Western main character. He's kind of nonchalant in the beginning of the story. He's talking about how he can see these people like basically coming at him. He could tell they're probably coming for him, but he was like, meh, I'll just push that out of my mind and wipe the dust off my boot. So that's very Clint Eastwood of it, and that's usually what you see in a Western. Like, your main character is very stonewalled, yet full of morals. It's kind of a duality of it. And usually in a Western, what is different than more culturally prevalent genres now, usually your main character or your hero, whatever the case may be, for the most part, accepts Western judgment. There might be times when they're trying to like push more towards a lawful thing or whatever, but in a lot of these, it's like they accept that and they are on the good side of it. So it's almost like being chaotic good, or however you want to look at it in that sense, where, a lot of Westerns end in shootouts, and it's like, okay, well, technically the government probably didn't want you to have a shootout, but you're all for it because it's a Western, and the main character understands that in the West, that is Western justice, and they're going to give justice the Western way. So that's where let me see, where's it at? Now, this is where it's interesting. Mr. Oakhurst was right in supposing that he was included in this category, meaning men that needed to be taken care of. Not for doing anything wrong, but he was from a different city, came in, won a bunch of money. I'm assuming he won it fairly. But the people of Poker Flats were like, and, I'm going to try and pronounce this the way it's written. It's again justice, which is, I guess, against. It's again justice to let this young man from Roaring Camp, an entire stranger, carry away our money. So, in their mind of this secret committee, it was completely plausible that because he came in and he was a stranger and he won all that money, he wasn't going to take the money from Poker Flats. Not even from them, but from this entity that is the West. It's like, no, you don't get to just come in here, stranger, and take ours and then leave, and now this entity is poorer. And the whole demeanor of it is quite absurd, but we accept it because it's a Western, and the Western has become its own thing. So let's see. Now, we talk, the prompt asked about like romanticizing in the Western, and I thought towards the end of the story of The Outcast of Poker Flats was a good example when, there were other examples throughout the story that I'm trying to keep this short. I'm not going to include, but, other instances where they kind of show that, there is a very strict role that women can play. You accept it because it's a Western, but in the back of your mind, you're like, man, this is really outlandish now because there's a wider range that men and women can play. But at the end, the main character and a female character, they slept all that day and the next, nor did they waken when voices and footsteps broke the silence of the camp. And when pitying fingers brushed the snow from their wan faces, you could scarcely have told from the equal peace that dwelt upon them which was she that had sinned. Even the law of Poker Flat recognized this and turned away, leaving them still locked in each other's arms. So, I mean, that's a pretty beautiful paragraph, in my opinion. You know, it's this whole story was built up upon Poker Flats, the entity, boom, boom, boom. People finally find them, and like they've wasted away in an embrace under a tree, the whole nine. And rather than disturb that, it was like, you know, as they said, Poker Flats, the entity, recognizes, leave them in peace, in nature, which kind of ties back into week three's naturalistic views when we were reading Edward Abbey's story. And I absolutely fell in love with that paragraph. I thought it was a perfect closing sentiment. So I honestly think that there can be a romantic side to it, and I think a lot of it in Westerns comes from nature, because it's a very distinct feel in an old school Western. You know, the desert and it's a give and take. Like you'll find instances where it's like, man, they're in the desert, they're gonna die, they're dehydrated. But then on the other side of it, you can go another scene where it's like they're in absolute love with the desert, or you know, the farm, or whatever the case may be. And it's very powerful, the role that nature plays. And I think it plays such a powerful role because the West is its own entity in this genre. Okay, I'm already at 11 minutes, so we need to move past this and get into Zane Grey's, because I think I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this, and that's not good. The Day of the Beast. Now, because there were so many pieces, I'm assuming not many of you read this one, just like I'm not probably going to have read the ones you did, if any. So to summarize, the story is about post-World War I, and it follows three wounded veterans on their way home from the war. Notably, Darren Lane is the main character. And from the beginning, I almost felt like I was, what was that movie? Walking Tall. Because it was, you know, this character was coming back to his home, not knowing what to expect. And there were times when I thought it was going to break out into something kind of like Walking Tall. So Western tie-ins that I can easily note. One, in a lot of Westerns, you usually have a wanderer that's somewhere new, wanderer that's coming back to an old place, but your main character is usually a wanderer. And in this case, Darren Lane fits that, as well as, like I said, usually your main character, like Mr. Oakhurst, they're very stone-faced, and they're trying to understand how to conform to this social norm and still put in the morality that they carry. Especially when you're talking about a veteran that comes back from war, usually your morality is going to change, and you have to find a way to either meld it into society or bury it deep down. There is no getting rid of it once you have it. So this character, Darren Lane, at the beginning of the story, him and his two buddies, they are very preemptive. They're wondering basically what they're going to meet when they get home. And this story really touched me because, you know, it's veterans. And it's a very sad representation of how veterans are treated, in my opinion. At the beginning, Darren Lane and his buddies are walking through the streets when they get off their, I'm assuming, boat, and they first thing you see is veterans on the street begging for food, and Darren Lane's like, I will starve to death before I do that. And that's a powerful notion that a lot of us have said, and that's one area where I kind of have less compassion for these days, because the VA has so many options for us, and there's so many people willing to help, and a veteran should never be on the street, and I don't put that on civilians. I think there's more than enough military members that we should be able to take care of one another. But I digress. So, issues I had with this story. That is actually why I liked it, because I had so many issues with it. Not so much because I thought the content was good, but because the content annoyed me. And it just made me happy that it's not like that anymore. So when we're talking about military issues, the most predominant one throughout the entire thing is people not respecting that a veteran doesn't want to talk about things. For instance, I see that. I don't like the color of your face. And this is the doctor talking to Darren. It was hell, wasn't it? Did you kill a couple of Huns for me? Questions like this latter one always alienated Lane in some unaccountable way. It must have been revealed on his face. Never mind, Darren. I see that you did. I'm glad you're back alive. Now, what can I do for you? I like to think that people today don't do this as much, but it is just prevalent throughout this whole story. There's so many people who always reference, how many people did you kill? And to me, it's like a slap in the face. Like, every time I read that, and then, you read the description of, like, how he then shuts off. He's just like... And that is a very rude thing to do. And I can only assume from the story that that is how it was, portrayed after World War I. And I am glad we have progressed past that, because that is just, it was quite horrendous to read this. Even his family, talking about, he had been shot, and he's like, yes, I was shot. And then they go into, well, how many people did you kill? Did you do anything you regret? And, those are the kind of things that damage a veteran, because, like, when my dad came back from war, none of us asked questions. And I remember once after I joined, he told me, he was like, maybe one day me and you will talk, and I'll tell you some of the stuff that happened. And it took a couple years, and we did. And, he opened up a side to me that I had never seen, and there were things that happened that I couldn't believe. Some funny in retrospect, some pretty depressing, and, bother him even to today. But if he was given this type of situation to deal with it, I could only imagine mentally what that would have done to him, instead of being allowed to either bury it or conform to move past it. So that's enough about that. There's plenty of examples of that in the book, so if you want to, please check it out. The second is cultural issues dealing with equality and respect. The fact that there is an ongoing battle between Darren's mother and sister about, how crazy she is, because she's running around, and she's, they have a whole argument about how she should, the mother saying you should marry not for love, but because, he does well, and then you can be a good team, and blah, blah, blah. And, the daughter, rebuts that, you don't even love dad since his mistake, and, follies, and blah, blah, blah. And the whole thing is just mind-boggling to me that, these arguments actually had to happen. And I'm like, equality is equality. You marry for love, you marry because you're happy, and your parents support you. As long as the guy's not hitting or, doing drugs or something like that, who am I to stand in the way of love? That is everybody's equal right, as an adult especially. So it just blew my mind to read these arguments. And then to take it a step further, we get to the point where Darren moves past the girl that basically Dear John'd him without even sending a Dear John. And he's talking about this girl, Mel, and how basically she had a kid at a bastard, and was shunned, got the scarlet letter, the whole nine. And I was like, man, I never, in a more recent writing, have really dealt with that in literature. And I was just like, this is completely crap, for lack of anything else. Like, he's talking to the girl's dad, and the dad's like, oh, well, that we disowned her, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, this is blowing my mind that something in the 20s happened like this. And it goes to show how far we have progressed in equality over such a short amount of time. So, and it kind of ties together both the culture and the military, because the whole reason that Darren wants to marry this girl is because he feels a common ground of they've both been shunned by society. Darren more shunned because people don't know how to act around him. Her more because people just think she did the complete wrong thing and she's to blame. But he was like, I know what she feels like. Like, nobody cares. She's out on her own, and he wants to take care of her and help her and her child. And he's met with resistance by a dad. You would think a dad would be like, thank God somebody wants to help take care of my daughter. I felt so bad that she's been shunned, da-da-da. No, that's not how it was met at all. Lastly, I'm already cutting it really long. I wanted to talk about the descriptive language. I think that a descriptive language scholar would enjoy this story because it kind of shows the progression of words. First off, in this story, near the beginning, you get the use of the word Negro, which definitely wouldn't hear now. It has disappeared from, well, it hasn't disappeared, but it's definitely not common language to describe an individual like it was in this book, even though he didn't even mean it as rude. So that kind of shows how descriptive language has progressed. But then there's keywords that I noticed that are used more than once that, unlike descriptive language, has either eliminated those words or has changed the meaning, and now therefore its use in society is different. Notably, queer, ejaculated, tax, and numbskull. The use of queer in this was odd or happy in two different instances. Now that is a very abrasive term, so you stay away from it. Ejaculated was used as an identifier for dialogue. Tax, not as in the form of tax, but like you're taxing my nerves or whatever the case may be. And I'm like, man, that's an old school way of looking at it. And then numbskull. I don't think I've heard that word in many a years, and even then I only heard it once. So the descriptive language in this, it was quite intriguing to see the language then compared to now, and the words they use to describe things, and how you wouldn't use them today at all. So, okay, I'm sorry I went really long. Last note, look at the mustache. One last note, if you didn't catch the quote at the beginning, you need to go look up Bret Hart. I'm not even one for wrestling anymore, but Bret Hart was a pretty cool dude. So that's all I got. Hope to hear from you guys throughout the rest of this week, and I'll see you next week.